Welcome back. Thanks. We'll resume with questioning by the state. Mr. Swisher, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, I'll give you a minute to get set up here.
We're good. Thanks.
Fair to say that you have a fairly high degree of trust in the police.
Yes.
And you have a nephew who is a deputy, is that right?
Yes.
But you say he likes to talk more about farming than he does about being a deputy?
He's his life work is farming, but he also is a deputy.
All right. I need to ask you then is, if you were to serve as a juror on this case, the state would call witnesses. Some of those would be law enforcement officers. Some would be bystanders. And if you were to consider the testimony of a bystander versus a law enforcement officer, do you think that the law enforcement officer, given the way you feel, would have a little bit of an advantage with you?
Not really. If they were two people at the same situation giving information as they saw it on both, they're two individuals. What one does for and what one doesn't isn't pertinent.
So if you were then, you say witness A, who is a law enforcement officer, witness B is a bystander, and they both they're there for the exact same event. And witness A says it happens one way, the law enforcement officer says it happens one way, but the bystander says no, it didn't happen that way, something else happened. Do you think that you would tend to believe the officer or the bystander?
Difficult. I'm really not sure. It would depend on who was closer, who was there, who was this, who was that. They couldn't have both been standing exactly side by side and seeing two totally different things. I wouldn't think. So I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I appreciate your answers to my questions today and for your time this morning, ma'am.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the state will strike the juror.
All right, juror 23, you're excused from service in this case. The deputy will collect some of the matters for you. Also, I'd like to take that.
Okay.
And go with the jury, the deputy, and you are excused from all service, so unless you get another summons in the future.
Thank you.
You bet. And counsel, remind me to talk to you at the break. Yes. Just to inform you on some developments outside the courtroom. Okay? Nothing major. All right, we are now up to juror 26. On up.
See here.
Yeah. All right, good morning.
Good morning.
You are juror 26, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Before I turn things over to the attorneys, I'm going to ask a few questions, but first I'm going to swear you in so that all of your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. First thing I'm going to ask you about is the questionnaire. First of all, thank you for filling it out and getting it back to us. We appreciate the time you took to do that. Was everything true that you put on the questionnaire?
Yes.
Is there anything that you might want to change or add to? And I say that because sometimes you fill out a questionnaire months ago and you realize, oh, that wasn't really accurate, or I should have added this, I forgot about that. As you sit here right now, is there anything that you'd want to correct?
Not that I can think of. Yeah.
All right. When the attorneys ask you specific questions about specific answers, something might come to your mind.
Sure.
Feel free to give an answer that's different than on your questionnaire because, again, on reflection, things might be different.
Sure.
Okay? Now, the questionnaire also advised you not to read any articles, to avoid the media about information about this case since you are a potential juror. But in the course of life, inadvertently, you might have been exposed to something, a headline, or a friend says, hey, do you know about this? And since you're advised not to tell anybody you're a potential juror, you can't exactly stop them and tell them why. Were you, after the questionnaire, exposed to any additional information about the case?
Only through the news when they talk about this is starting to
The trial started?
The trial started. Yeah.
Anything beyond that, just the dates and the progress of things? Anything about
Not
this?
particularly about the case itself.
Okay, anything outside the case but that has substance about the parties, the attorneys?
No.
Okay, all right. And we ask all these questions, as I'm sure you guessed, is because we want to know what you've heard and seen, and you might even formed opinions about it. That's fine. But when you're a juror, you have to decide the case based on the law and only the evidence that you hear in court. You have to disregard anything you've heard. You have to put aside any opinions you might have formed and decide the case based on just what you hear in the courtroom. Do you think you could do that?
I think so. I'll try my best.
Okay. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list you were given?
No.
All right. Now, the length of trial we estimate is going to be about 4 weeks long once we start, which will be March 29th. So, for example, if you were picked out to be on this jury, you'd be essentially cut loose until March 29th and then be in trial for 4 weeks. Do you think that can work for you?
Should be. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Just a question though. So between
Sure.
now and 29th, is it 29th, I will be.
You're on your own.
Okay.
You don't have to report in. You're
Okay.
completely as if you were not on jury service,
Okay.
except for the fact that you can't read or follow any media about the case.
Yeah. I ask because we were actually planning for some vacation and travel and whatnot. So.
Okay. Thank you. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nelson, but in doing so, just a couple pieces of advice. Make sure you speak close to the microphone so that we can pick you up. If you'd like to take the mask off, that might make it easier to hear you as well,
Okay.
but I'll leave that to your discretion. I'm going to continue to wear a mask,
Okay.
and we have a lot of plexiglass, so
Okay.
that might make it easier. And also, sometimes this examination process can be conversational the way we are in normal life, where we interject with affirmations during the questions,
Yeah.
and then at the end you might overlap because you know what the question is going to be. Try and avoid that. Try and avoid talking over each other because our court reporter needs to take everything down, and so we need as many pauses as we can get, not talking over each other. Okay? And it's a little bit abnormal to do it because it's not the normal conversational style. So I appreciate your efforts in that regard. So, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
What? No, I guess good morning. Sorry. It's already been a long day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you some questions, just generally try to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
And then I want to follow up with some questions about some of the answers you gave in the questionnaire. Okay?
Okay.
I know you may not remember every word you wrote. You may not remember every question that was asked, but I have a copy here and I can help you with that. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So first of all, if you and I were to meet in a social situation, party or some event, what are a couple things about you that you would want me to walk away knowing about you?
If it's about myself, I think I'm hardworking, I'm honest. I'm not too much a party person, put it that way.
All right.
So you may not want to invite me back. What else?
I see.
Yeah, I'm fairly family oriented.
Yeah, I see. I was going to say, I see you have 3 daughters,
Yes.
and they're all in their teenage years, or close to.
So 16, 14, and 10. Yeah.
How's that? How is it having 3 adolescent daughters?
It's pretty nice. I'm outnumbered. I mean, they're all very nice kids. Yeah, so they're all behaving very well. I love them and they love us. So
Do they get along well?
pretty much, yeah, normal. Yeah, siblings.
So, can you think of a situation, whether it be involving your kids or in your professional life, where you've had to resolve conflict between them?
Oh
Between
yes,
2 people?
definitely. Yeah.
How do you go about resolving the conflict as it arises?
Well, if as among my kids, I will be very direct. If I'm on scene and basically watching the whole thing evolve, then I would point them to what's right, what's wrong immediately. Try to get them to understand what should be done and what shouldn't be done. If I'm not there, I didn't see the whole thing happen, I will try to understand what happened before I make any judgment or any decision on the course of action. I think a lot of times, especially for kids, you can reason with them to the nth degree. So you have to put some boundaries down out immediately. If the conflict is serious, if not, a lot of times we just verbally kind of talk through the thing and try to resolve that. Professionally, I think I haven't actually experienced anything that I would have to do much to kind of resolve, so to speak. Usually I just have to talk to my my boss and about certain things that I don't see I agreed with or I would support, and we'll talk through those things.
Okay. So turning it, kind of to your daughters. Let's say one of your daughters comes to you and says, "This is what happened," and the other one comes and tells you, "This isn't what happened," and you didn't see what happened. You weren't there. How do you decide which one is telling you the more accurate version of events?
Sometimes based on experience, you can see from their responses, the words they use, or their facial expression, or those kind of things. You can kind of make a call on whether he or she, or whether she is speaking off from their heart. Sometimes you just can't figure out. I mean, if the situation is not that bad, I don't think you have to actually find out exactly what happened.
Okay.
At that point.
Well, your job, if you were to be selected as a juror in this case, is essentially to find out what happened.
Mhm.
You have to, you are the judge of the facts of this case.
Yes. Mhm.
And there may be evidence in this case that if you look at, one person may come in and say, "This is how you should interpret this evidence," and another person will come in and say, "This is how you should interpret this piece of evidence." What tools would you use to reconcile and ultimately decide the facts?
Well, there's certain things I'll do. First of all, I will have to do my due diligence on studying about those evidence myself,
Okay.
based on how I would interpret those evidence. And I think at the jury, the reason why we have a group of people is we can actually use that group of people to help kind of deliberate or bounce back certain ideas or certain interpretations.
So one of the important rules that you have to agree to abide by is that you will only base your decision on the evidence that's presented in court.
Mhm.
Right? So you would not be able to go home and study or look up. Would you feel comfortable doing that?
Oh yeah, I mean we in each situation you still have to have unlimited resources, and in this situation the limited resources will be whatever that is presented and available. And if I'm asked to make a decision on that's given, then I will have to work with whatever that is available.
So let me ask you this, sir, is in your personal life, if you were making an important decision, whatever that decision may be, would you describe yourself as kind of an avid researcher? You try to get as much information as is possible, or are you the type of person that can make a decision very easily and don't require much information?
It's pretty situational, but I would say I'm more on the research side of things. Try to get myself educated, so to speak.
Okay. And so if you're asked to make an important decision in your private or personal or professional life, is there some point where you kind of say, I can't make a decision based on the information that's available to me?
Yes.
And if you were to apply that in this particular situation, you understand that the result would have to be a not guilty verdict.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
And are you comfortable with that in a court of law?
Yes.
When you first received your notice to come to jury service, what was your first reaction to that?
Surprised.
Why?
Well, I guess this is my first time getting that kind of a summons, so I was kind of surprised.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's fair.
And none of my friends, I don't recall any of my immediate family or friends have done jury duty.
Okay. Now, when you learned, you obviously are familiar with this case, right?
I've seen reports from the news, yeah.
And you have some information about what is alleged to have happened,
Mhm.
right? Is that, I'm sorry, sir, we'll have to use words. Is that a yes?
Yes, sorry.
When you learned that you would be a potential juror in this case, did your reaction change
Reaction to...
to having to serve jury duty?
No.
So, did you have any concern about being a potential juror in this case?
Not particularly about this case. Originally, I was concerned about COVID, other stuff, but timing, but not particularly about this case.
No particular concerns for your physical safety as a juror in such a high-profile case?
No, not physical. Could be mentally.
Mentally?
Yeah, just because of the high publicity of the case.
Okay. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Well, I think originally, when a lot of people was talking, the news was talking about the case, and when I got the questionnaires thinking about potentially being a jury, then I was kind of a little bit overwhelmed by the news and by the. I mean, at that point, I think during that part of the days, I think it's also closer to the election, and a lot of those discussions and reports are actually linked to my thinking of casting my votes back then. And so that's what I mean by there's those mental kind of challenges and overwhelming happened. After that, there's this almost back to normal. I don't think I've done any more research or particularly or intention to look into the case anymore, and just wait for this to happen.
Okay, thanks. You were asked a series of questions in the questionnaire about some general principles of law that apply.
Okay.
And one of the things that you'll ultimately be instructed is that you will be required to follow the law, even if you think the law is wrong or should be different.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that?
I think I understand it. I agreed with that.
So whatever the rules of law are that the judge instructs us in this case are the rules of law that apply, even if you have an opinion about that the law should be different, essentially. Do you understand?
You are correct. I understand that.
So I would like to ask you a few questions in terms of your questionnaire, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The first question that was asked was what you know about this case, what you read, learned, heard about this case.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming you don't remember verbatim what you wrote. And so there are a few things that you wrote I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
So you write that you recall seeing reports and video clips of the arrest on TV.
Yes.
But I started to, quote, relate, end quote, to the event when the protests became violent and destructive and some of the places familiar to me, and I started to follow the daily news.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what that means? What do you mean by the word relate? And
I put it into context. I think what I was trying to say is when I read the news about the arrest and I saw the clips, it's still a little bit different, a distance to me until all the protests and also the destruction that happened in Minneapolis. A lot, as I mentioned, a lot of those places I visited before in the past. That I said, well, this case has some consequences, and that actually goes beyond just these few people on the scene, and also to a wider group of people.
okay. Now you indicated also in that answer that after some of the rioting settled down, you drove your family to the scene. Why did you decide to do that?
I think part of it is curiosity. I've lived in Minneapolis Minnesota since 99. I haven't seen such a huge protests and destruction in the neighborhood before. So part of it is curious. I just want to see from my eyes what actually happened to those places, than just seeing those images from TV. And the reason why I drove my family is actually not the whole family, just my wife and one of my daughters around, is to also let them see those places. I don't recall exactly when it happened, but I think during that time our church is also organizing some volunteer work in downtown Minneapolis or south of Minneapolis, that they are collecting food and stuff and whatnot. So I was also thinking of going there and take a look and see if there's anything that I can help. I've heard about people helping the people from different parts of the city came aftermath and help, clean up and whatnot. I want myself to see it with my own eyes, as well as want my daughter and my family to see it
And so did you ultimately participate in any of those volunteer efforts that you were describing?
We only did contribute food and supply to our church.
Okay. Now, you also wrote that you think that the media helped politicize the event during the following months as they moved beyond the death of Mr. Floyd. Remember that? What do you mean by that?
I think that's particularly related to all those referencing of the case during the election. I don't recall the details, but I think back then I was under the impression that some people are just using the case to advance their own political agenda or try to promote their own party, or those kind of things.
I also note that you indicated that you had posted some social media posts about your visit to.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
I usually will post photos of me traveling to different places to Facebook, social media, just as a habit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as the judge just said to you when he was asking you some of the preliminary questions, it's okay that you formed an opinion about these events.
Mm-hmm.
And the question becomes, can you set aside those opinions
Mm-hmm.
and be a fair and impartial juror in this case, right?
Yep.
And based on your answers in your questionnaire, it would be fair to say that you had formed a negative opinion of my client prior to coming here today.
Are you asking me a question, or are you just indicating your?
Well, you indicated the question here is, from what you have seen, read, or heard, do you have a general impression of the defendant? That's Mr. Chauvin.
Mm-hmm.
And you checked the box somewhat negative.
Mm-hmm.
So you formed an opinion based upon that information that you had seen and read and your visits to the site, a negative impression of my client.
I think I do have a negative impression of the whole case. I am not sure if I have a negative impression on the defendant personally. Now, I think the issue that I would want to raise, I think I put it in as one of the answers to the questionnaire, is that the negative impression that I had came from the fact, or what I've seen is that there was a civilian died.
Right. In fact, what you wrote is, a civilian died under the watch of a group of policemen, plus the news and social media coverage of the incident caused me to feel negatively
Yes.
about the defendant.
Okay. Yep.
And so you understand, again, in those principles of law, Mr. Chauvin is presumed innocent of this offense.
Yes, I do understand that.
And you answered that you could apply that presumption of innocence to him in this case.
I believe so.
But you have formed a negative opinion of it. How do you overcome that?
I'm not sure if I need to overcome that. I think I think through the process I will have to follow the process, and based on the evidence and be really focused on what is being charged or what should I put it? Yeah, what's being charged, so to speak. I may have an opinion of something that is totally unrelated to the charge itself, and if I have to make the decision on whether or not there's these charges. I'm not sure if I'm using the right word.
That's okay.
Yeah, these charges, then I will have to try to focus on, again, going back to these charges and looking at these evidence, and are they actually leading to one conclusion or the other. Think. Yeah, to your question, I think I will have to try to go back to the charges as much as I can to keep myself focused. If I, yeah.
And you indicated in your questionnaire that you would watch the video 4 to 5 times by your best estimate?
Yes.
And would that be the video, and when we refer to the video, we're talking about this Facebook, social media video that was posted?
I think it's mostly on TV, so news.
Okay. And that was going to be my question is, did you go on the internet and watch the entirety
No.
of the video? So the video, when you say you've watched it 4 to 5 times, you've watched little parts of the video that were presented in the news.
In the news, yeah.
So the aftermath, so to speak, the rioting and demonstrations and protests and all of that stuff, you indicated that you thought had both a negative and positive effect on this community.
Uh-huh.
Could you
Yes.
explain that a little more?
I think the negative is definitely the destruction, the loss of properties, and I shouldn't say convenient, but you have stores vandalized and those kind of stuff, and causing the neighborhood a lot of trouble. Those are the negatives. The positives are I saw a lot of people from the neighborhood and from even outside of the neighborhood came and helped, and that shows that people, even if they don't disagree with each other, they still want the better, want the neighborhood to restore and then become better. I think
So-
that's how, yeah.
And so ultimately the very next question reads that no matter what you've heard or seen about this case, and no matter what opinions you might have formed, can you put that aside and decide this case only on the evidence you receive in court, follow the law, and decide the case in a fair and impartial manner? That's the question, and your response was, I will try my best, and I think that that's important to ensure a fair trial so that justice can be served.
Yes.
And so ultimately what we need you to be able to say is that not you can try, but that you can do it. Do you understand that?
Yes.
So the question that I have for you is, based upon, the opinions that you have formed previously, based upon, going and visiting this site and doing or offering to do some volunteer work, and your perspectives on the aftermath, so to speak, can you honestly say, I'm going to put all of this aside and focus only on the evidence in this case?
Yes, I do. And if I may add, some of those things may not directly influence the case itself that I'm in.
Okay. So there's a question then in part 3 of the questionnaire that asks whether you have ever seen the police use more force than was needed.
Mhm.
And you checked, looks like you checked yes, crossed it off, checked no, and then you wrote not personally seen, but through news reports on TV.
Yes.
Can you explain, like, are you referring to this particular case? Are you referring to other cases?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Have you ever personally seen the police use more force than was needed?
Oh, okay. If I recall correctly, I think the first impression that I read that I say yes is because I probably saw something on TV. I have not seen that personally in any case. So.
Okay. But when you in the written response, you say you've seen it on TV, not personally. I think you kind of understood the context.
Yeah.
My question is what you're seeing on TV in reference to this particular case, or is it some other case that you think?
Or some other cases, yeah.
There was a series of questions that asked you to circle your appropriate response from a 1 to a 5, somewhat agree, or
Okay.
very much agree, all the way to strongly disagree.
Mhm.
One of the questions was, do police in your community feel safe? And you strongly agreed with that proposition.
Yes.
And you also strongly disagreed with the notion of defunding the police department.
Yes.
And so the next series of questions asked you about both the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the Blue Lives Matter movement. And you wrote that you think all lives matter. You support nonviolent protests against racially related violence against black people. However, I am also aware of other political agendas that are associated with this, which I do not necessarily support. That's what you wrote.
That's probably referring to the election period when some people are.
It was in relation to the Black Lives Matter. That's what you wrote. So how politically do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement was brought into the election stuff? And why would that cause you to disagree with that organization?
I don't think I've formed an opinion of whether I agree with the organization or not. I don't know that there is an organization.
Okay. So I guess I want to make
Yeah.
sure that, again, we're like your opinions and
Yeah.
your thought process here. You say that you support nonviolent I'm going to back up because I think it's important we put this in the proper context. Okay?
Sure.
The question reads, how favorable or unfavorable are you about Black Lives Matter? You checked a box that said somewhat favorable, and then you wrote, I think all lives matter. I support nonviolent protests against racially related violence against black people. However, I am also aware of other political agendas that are associated with this, which I do not necessarily support.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess my question is, what are the agendas that you don't support, and how does that affect your perception of the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think back then it's just a lot of publicity about the term. I don't even recall if back then there's any distinguish difference between a movement and an organization and those kind of things. But I did hear a lot of politicians using the word during their campaign.
Okay. And so you found that to be disfavorable? The fact that politicians...
Through that, I think my impression back then is some people are just taking advantage of that term during their campaign.
Okay.
I think that's what I was trying to say.
Okay. And you had never heard the term Blue Lives Matter before?
Before the survey or questionnaire.
Okay. So in terms of politicians or perhaps advertisements that incorporated the Black Lives Matter into it, I think what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you did not like how it became sort of a commercial or to try to gain some advantage. Would that be fair?
During the campaigns, yes.
So my last series of questions, the very last two questions in this questionnaire ask you, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? And you check the box yes. And then it asked you to explain that. And so I guess my question really is, when you write, need to take full advantage of it to bring justice to the situation, and so that others can also use this to design policies that will prevent similar things to happen, and move on. So do you, when you describe the need for justice in this case, do you automatically ascribe the concept of justice to the state of Minnesota?
Maybe I don't think I've considered that when I wrote that. I'm not sure of what implication.
Well, so justice is somewhat of a nebulous term. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And what justice may mean to me may differ from what it means to you,
Could
at
be.
least in the global sense. Agreed?
Agreed.
But what you're telling us is that you see your service as a potential juror on this as a way to potentially result in policy changes.
No, I don't have. I don't think I have that kind of that. And if I convey that message in that response, then I don't think. Put it that way. The case is the case as I see it now. Is that should policy is not decided here. As my understanding is, policy decides somewhere else. So if I am selected as part of the juror, then my duty is as I understood it, is only about this case.
Okay. And you would be correct about that. Okay. Now the question becomes, though, is, your position on the matter. And so ultimately, would you agree or disagree that justice could involve a not guilty verdict?
Yes, I agree.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Juror 26, we're going to excuse you from this case.
Okay.
You are also excused from jury service, so unless you get a summons years from now, you should be just fine.
Okay.
You don't have to report back in. You'll go with the deputy, they'll take some of the paperwork from you, and then you're free to go about your business. And thank you for your candid answers and taking the time to come here and walk through this.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, juror 27. Good morning. You are a new panel that just arrived this morning, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you some initial instructions then. And first, can you all hear me? So I'm going to take my mask off so I'm not muffled. If you cannot hear me or anyone else, we have hearing assistance devices available. But my name is Pete Cahill, and I am one of the judges of the district court, and you have been summoned, as you know, as potential jurors in the case of State of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, which is a criminal case related to the death of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. Now, a person charged with a crime has a right to a fair trial before an impartial judge and an impartial jury. In order to make sure that the jurors who are selected are impartial, the law provides that the court and the attorneys for the parties may ask questions to all the prospective jurors, which must be answered under oath. First of all, thank you for filling out the questionnaire that was mailed to you. Your contribution to the important and serious matter at hand is best served by continuing to provide full and complete answers to the questions that you'll be asked today. Those questions will follow up on issues from the questionnaire and possibly other topics. Now, after the questioning is over, the attorneys will have the right to excuse some of you from service on this jury, and I may excuse others of you for what is called cause. In either case, it does not mean that you are not a fair person, and you should not take offense in being excused. I also ask that you not take any offense at any question you might be asked, We must pry, to some extent, in order to explore opinions you might hold and to hear about experiences that you have had that might affect your ability to serve in this case. Now, in this case, the defendant, Mr. Chauvin, has been charged with murder in the second degree and manslaughter in the second degree. But during the normal course of a trial, charges might be added to or subtracted from those charges. But those are the charges as it stands today. To the charges, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty, which is a denial of each and every material allegation in the charges. And I'm now going to ask the parties to introduce themselves and their clients, beginning with the state of Minnesota.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Swisher. I represent the state of Minnesota.
Hello, my name is Christina Marinakis. I'm assisting with the prosecution.
Hello, my name is Keith Ellison, and I represent the state of Minnesota.
I'm Joshua Larson. I also am representing the state. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Nelson.
Hello, my name is Eric Nelson. I'm the attorney for the defendant, Derek Chauvin, along with my assistant, Amy Voss.
Thank you. Now, does anyone know any of the attorneys who have just introduced themselves? All right. Does anybody know anyone else from the Office of the Attorney General, including Aaron Eldridge, Jerry Blackwell, or anyone else who might work for that office? All right. Does anyone? Yes.
In passing, I might know people who work in the Attorney General office, but no one that I could name particularly.
All right. And you are juror number?
29.
Juror 29, we'll have you talk about that when we question you individually. So if we forget, please remind us to follow up on that. Does anyone have any familiarity with anybody from Mr. Nelson's office? Okay. Does anyone on this small panel know anybody else in the courtroom? All right. Now, you've been given a copy of a list of potential witnesses, and I'd ask that you please review it before you are questioned individually, if you have not done so already. And you'll be asked essentially if you know anyone on that list. Now, one of the things that the attorneys may not do in jury selection is to instruct you on the law. But I want you to be aware of some of the basic concepts that apply in all criminal cases so that you may keep them in mind as you answer the court's and the attorney's questions. So I will instruct you as follows. First, the charges against the defendant are not evidence, and they create no inference of guilt. No member of the jury panel should in any way permit himself or herself to be prejudiced against the defendant because a charge has been made against him or because he has been placed on trial. The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges made against him, and in order for you to find the defendant guilty, the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial, unless and until he has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, according to the law and the evidence admitted at trial. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. It does not mean a fanciful or capricious doubt, nor does it mean beyond all possibility of doubt. If you serve on this jury, you and your fellow jurors will be the sole judges of whether a witness is to be believed and of the weight to be given their testimony. There are no hard and fast rules to guide you in this respect, but in determining believability and weight of testimony, jurors may take into consideration the witness's interest or lack of interest in the outcome of the case, relationship to the parties, ability and opportunity to know, remember, and relate the facts, manner, age and experience, frankness and sincerity or the lack thereof, the reasonableness or the unreasonableness of their testimony in light of all the other evidence in the case, and any other factors that bear on believability and weight. If on this jury, you should rely in the last analysis upon your own experience, good judgment, and common sense. Now, there are things you should not do during jury selection. You are not investigators. You are not to go out to do any looking, and you are not to ask people about this matter. You are not to use the internet to look for information about this case or about the law. Above all, you must not talk to anyone who is involved, the lawyers, or the witnesses. Do not be offended if the attorneys or parties do not talk to you. They know that it would be improper to contact you except through the normal jury selection process, and they will generally confine themselves to a brief greeting. Now, during the selection process, your family and friends might be curious as to what you are doing. You may tell them you are on a panel of potential jurors in a criminal case, and that is all you should tell them. Since that is all you should tell family and friends, that is all you should tell the general public. So, during these proceedings, please refrain from using Facebook, Twitter, or other social media to announce that you are a potential juror or to comment on this trial. You may access those social media tools, but please do not publish any information about this case or your thoughts about this case. You do not have to stay away from people and refuse to speak to them. Do whatever you wish, but do not talk about this case, and above all, do not talk at all to anyone involved in it. Now, because of the nature of the charges, this case is receiving media coverage. Do not read about this case in the newspapers or online, and do not listen to news about it on radio or television. Now, this trial, including jury selection, is being televised, but no video of you or any other juror will be taken at any time, now or during trial if you are selected. Also, your name will not be used in the courtroom. You will only be referred to by your random number to protect your privacy. The audio of anything you say will be broadcast, unless we need to discuss something deeply personal or extremely sensitive or embarrassing, and I specifically order the audio not to be broadcast. In that case, the audio will only be heard within this courtroom. In that case, you will still have to answer questions, and they will be on the record, but without any audio or video broadcast whatsoever. So with that, I'm going to return you to the waiting area, except for juror number 27. Juror number 27 can come up to the witness stand, but the other two can go back to the waiting room with the deputy. Sure. Good morning. It's still morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to put my mask back on. If you would like to remove
will automatically end in a few moments. Please press any key to continue the meeting.
What is that? All right. I'm going to take care of that. We had a Zoom hearing earlier this morning, so perhaps it's waiting for us to get back on.
Your meeting will automatically end in a few moments. Please press any key to continue the meeting.
Okay. Kind of threw me there. I will have my mask on. We have plexiglass, and I will try and stay 6 feet away. If you would like to remove your mask, you may do so.
Your meeting will automatically end in a few moments. Please press any key to continue the meeting.
I feel like I'm on hold with Microsoft. So in any case, I just wanted to make you comfortable with these COVID restrictions, and I've seen you've removed your mask. Thank you. Everybody just take a short recess here. Okay, let's get back to business. Before I turn the questioning over to the attorneys, what I want to do is swear you in to make sure that all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right. I'm going to ask you to pull up to the microphone. Unfortunately, it's not very movable. So,
Okay.
But that's good. I was able to pick up your voice. You filled out a questionnaire, and thank you so much for doing that. That really helps us to explore some topics. And the question I have for you to start with is, was everything true on the questionnaire?
Do I have any other question?
No, was it everything on the questionnaire true?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have, as you sit here right now, do you have any additions or amendments to it? I only ask because sometimes you fill out the questionnaire months ago, and in reflection you go, could be an opinion changed, or you, on reflection, think that something's inaccurate. It's fine. In fact, it's encouraged that if it's changed or you need to add or subtract something, feel free to volunteer that. As you sit here right now, is there anything at the top of your mind regarding possible changes?
No, but I think one of the things is I fill out the form 3 months ago, and I don't even remember what I wrote.
Right.
So yeah.
Don't worry. The lawyers are really good at reminding you about it. So what we're going to do is, as they ask questions, I don't want you to feel like, oh, I think I gave the wrong answer.
Right.
So feel free to say, that's not accurate. You're not going to get in trouble. What we're looking for is just candid, honest, open answers. The questionnaire is just a tool for that. And so your questions or your answers today, feel free to say something different. And they might ask you to explain why. Like, did you forget something, or have your opinions evolved? So feel free to offer any information. Now, you're not supposed to read any articles, and I think the questionnaire said, since you are a potential juror, avoid media about the case, about reading about it.
Okay.
But we recognize that sometimes, despite your best efforts, you might inadvertently be exposed to a headline, or a friend brings up, hey, did you hear about, and then give you some substance about the case. Anything since the time you filled out the questionnaire till today, anything like that happen where you've received more information about the case or the process or procedures, the attorneys, the parties, anything?
Just some information on the news.
Okay. And was it basically, I know there's been a lot on the news about the trial is starting, jury selection is in process.
Correct.
Anything beyond that?
No.
Okay. Now, and we bring that up, and you, in your questionnaire, you noted that you do recall some information from media reports about the case, and that's pretty much universal.
Yeah.
And the question isn't have you heard about the case, but what have you heard, and can you put that aside? Because if you are on the jury, your job is to be fair and impartial above all, but to decide the case only on the evidence in the courtroom and apply the law that I give to you, and disregard anything you heard outside the courtroom. And it's also okay if you've formed various opinions based on what you've heard, but you also have to put those opinions aside. And some people say I can, some people say I can't. And so that's some of the topics we're going to be exploring today.
Okay.
As you sit here right now, do you think you could put aside what you've heard outside the courtroom, any opinions you've formed, and decide the case just on the law and the evidence that you hear in court?
I do.
Okay, thank you. All right, did you recognize anybody on that long list of witnesses?
No.
All right. Is there anything about the length of the trial that causes you concern?
No.
Okay, do you think you could serve, because we're talking about 4 weeks, probably starting March 29th. We don't know how long deliberation goes, that's up to the jury. But you think you could accommodate that?
Correct.
All right, excellent. Anything else you wanted to ask or know before I turn it over to the attorneys?
No.
All right, for juror number 27, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
I think I can officially say good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for your patience. Sometimes these things take a little bit longer than we anticipate, but I appreciate you being here and for your patience this morning.
Thank you.
All right, so what I'm going to do, sir, is I'm going to ask you a series of kind of general questions about yourself, try to get to know you a little bit, and then I'm going to follow up with some specific questions about some answers you gave in your questionnaire.
Okay.
I understand that you wrote this and answered these questions quite some time ago. No one's trying to trick you. And if you want to be you want your recollection to be refreshed, we will certainly do that, okay?
Okay. Okay.
All right. I forgot. So let me ask you this. If you and I were to meet in a social circumstance, party, or some other event, what are a few things you would want me to know about you after that conversation?
After what conversation?
Well, we have a conversation at a party, we meet, we're talking. What do you want me to know about you?
My background.
Background, what you love, what you hate. You
What
tell
I
me.
do.
Yeah.
My hobbies.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, background, I came in the U.S. a little over 14 years ago. Went to school in Nebraska, moved to the state, Minnesota, in 2012, and I'm in IT. I see myself as a technologist. So I was laughing when the judge was having issues with Zoom earlier. So I love technology, so I'm in cloud and security and development, and I speak multiple languages. French is another language that I speak, and I'm married. I live with my beautiful wife, and we have a dog. So I love sport, and even though I went to school in Nebraska, I'm a big Gophers fan, and I love the Vikings, and so some of those things that I will share with you.
Good. And I'm sorry, did you say you have a daughter now?
No, I have a dog.
Oh, dog. I'm sorry. I was wondering because you had answered you had no children, and I heard daughters.
Correct.
Okay. When you first received the notice that you were going to be a juror, or you could potentially be a juror, what was your first reaction to that?
Surprise and anxious. Obviously, this is time consuming, and obviously I have this is civic duty also. So yeah, those are some of my first feelings that I had.
Okay. And then I think you subsequently learned that you could potentially be a juror in this case?
Correct.
And how did your feelings change, or what was your feeling when you learned that?
I think the anxiety, obviously the anxiety, went up, but I think in between I had a plan to travel internationally, so I had to cancel my I had to cancel my flight, and I guess that's the only feeling that I had. Nothing really changed.
Okay.
And I will also add that the fact that I understand that the case is very something that a lot of people are interested in, and the ability for me to to keep it from my wife, and so those things yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you said your anxiety kind of went up when you learned it was this case. Were you concerned about your personal safety?
No, not at all. It's just I think it's a big I think it's a big thing to decide in a case, So just making sure that if you potentially selected, that you make the right decision. Yes.
Okay. So you work. I know you work in information technology
Correct.
services,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe we're trying to keep you as anonymous as we can. So don't say where you work or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I understand you to be in management.
Correct.
How many people do you manage?
8 people.
8
Yeah.
people?
Yeah.
And can you think of a situation in your professional life where you have had to resolve a conflict between 2 of the people that work for you?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Obviously, before I became a manager, I was an individual contributor myself. So, so the ability to, the one thing that happens often with my team personally is my team is, first of all, is globally distributed. So I have few folks in Minneapolis, some other people in other states as well. conflict always happen, especially with my team when it comes to making a decision about technology or a strategy to implement a specific project. Person A or B might have different perspective about how to go about making that decision. Just for instance, we're talking about Zoom, so I'll use that example. Person A might say, well, I wanna use another collaboration tools, and B might be, okay, I love Zoom. So making that decision and ensuring that the team is aligned with whatever decision you make, and making sure that if we decide not to go with person B's opinion, it's nothing personal. I think that's some of those conflicts that I have to deal with. Yeah.
And so, if I kind of to paraphrase what I think, you take a look at the situation. You analyze both people's perspectives. You talk about it, and you then implement the appropriate decision.
Agreed.
Agreed?
Yeah.
And you understand in large part that that's what you would be doing if you were selected as a juror in this case.
I do.
You would have to decide this case with 11 other people, and all 12 of you would have to agree either guilty or not guilty. You understand that?
I do.
And that, have you, in your management experience, have those discussions ever become, or those decision-making processes, have they ever become heated?
Yeah, but I think it's just natural. Sometimes it comes naturally when people are passionate about the topic. Sometimes it just comes naturally. But I think for me, it's always important to make sure that my team understand that. Like I said earlier, that it's nothing personal. You can have all this strong opinion about a specific topic, but at the end, we just want the best for my organization, my team, right? So.
Right. Okay. So, in a different context of conflict, right? Can you think of a situation, either professionally or personally, where you've had to decide which person is telling the truth?
Well, I have. When person A come to me and said, this person have said this, and I think for me, I will listen to person A and then talk to person B and put both parties together and try to resolve that conflict, right? And so I think it has happened to me.
Okay. And so, and I understand the attempt to resolve that conflict, but how do you decide which of these people is telling the truth? Right? What tools would you use to determine whether someone is telling the truth about a situation?
You go with the fact. Go with evidence, I guess. And because sometimes that's the best way to go, right? Because people can say whatever they want, but I think at the end of the day, it's based on fact. If person A said that person B stole my laptop at work, but the laptop was not stolen by person B, then I will talk to both of them, and the fact doesn't support that argument. So,
okay. So, if you were a juror in this case, for example, you may hear testimony from witnesses about the same event. They're looking at the same event. One person is saying A, and another person is saying B. How do you determine which is the more credible explanation?
Well, I think I will go with the evidence that support the fact, right? I know maybe I'm talking in circle here, but it's either black or white, right? Or red or yellow. It's clear. So sometimes the best way to resolve conflict or misunderstanding is to go with what you have in front of you and go with that.
Right. So I think and maybe let me put it into perspective that you understand, because it's always hard to talk in the hypothetical. Right?
Yeah.
So you are you work in information technology, and you have a project that you're working on, and there are 2 software programs potentially that resolve that problem, right? And person number 1 says, well, I think we should use Zoom, and person number 2 says, I think we should use Teams, right? But they're both trying to resolve the same problem, right? And so when you have those 2 circumstances, right, you have 2 potential resolutions or explanations, how do you analyze which is the best to fit that problem?
So for us in technology, what we do for stuff like that is do a cost analysis, do risk, do what kind of benefit or feature these type of technology are bringing to your team, or added value, I should probably say, are bringing to your team. So then you look at both. I mean, and compare and see the added value that this technology are bringing to your organization or your business, and you go with the one that that works best for your organization.
Excellent, great, thanks. Now you were asked a series of questions, or when you first came in here, the judge gave you some basic rules of law that apply in all criminal cases.
Correct.
And you were asked some questions about those rules of law, and if you could follow them in this questionnaire.
Correct.
So one of the questions that I have for you is, if you would you be able to follow the law even if you think it should be different? If you disagree with the law?
I would.
Okay. So if Judge Cahill were to instruct you, this is the law, even if you disagree with it, do you think that you could follow that instruction?
I'll follow the law.
So I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Shouldn't take too long about your questionnaire.
Okay.
And again, I'm not trying to trick you, or take things out of context or anything. So you've obviously heard about the facts of this case, right? I mean, you've.
I don't know the fact about the case.
Okay. You've seen the social media video that went viral.
Some of it. I try to stay away from social media really, way before. So some of it, and I would say mainly on TV.
Okay.
Yeah.
So have you ever gone on the internet and watched the video that went viral in its entirety?
What video? There are multiple videos. What video specifically?
Okay. So that's part of what I want to talk about.
Okay.
So there's the video that was taken by a bystander, and it was posted on Facebook or some other social media platform.
I saw that.
Okay. So you went on the internet.
I didn't go on the internet. I think it was somebody showed me it pop up on my, because some of the if you go to, I have Apple News Plus, so some of those things will show you some of those stuff. Yeah, I didn't go on and look.
So that.
So I mean, like some of the news feed, like I believe Apple News Plus, give you some of those feed. It's just like
Right.
CNN and MSNBC or Fox News, and then you can click and see the news of the day.
Okay.
So that's how I got some of those things.
So that particular video, have you watched that particular video in its entirety?
Well, I only watch, I believe, whatever I got from the news. So I don't know if it was the whole video.
Okay, that's kind of what I'm trying to
Correct,
ask you.
because I don't know, and yeah.
So that you may have seen parts or snippets or clips of a video, but those were a part of a news or a media story. That's
Correct.
what you're saying? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
you got it. Yeah.
But you never, after reading a news story, said, I wonder if there's more to this, and went on the internet and looked for the entire quote-unquote video.
Correct.
Okay. And you obviously knew that this situation became pretty big news nationally, internationally, locally, obviously.
Yes.
And you've had conversations about the case with your friends.
with my wife.
And your wife? Yes. Okay. So the question, you were asked a question, from what you have seen, read, or heard, do you have a general impression of the defendant, in this case, Mr. Chauvin, and you checked somewhat negative, and you wrote, based on the video I saw on TV, but I also understand that I wasn't there and don't know what happened before the event.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And would you stand by that statement today?
I will.
Okay. And so I understand what you're saying in terms of you weren't there, you don't know what happened before, you don't know what happened after. Your opinion is somewhat based on this little bits that you've seen in the news, right?
Correct.
But nevertheless, you had a somewhat negative perception of that. Agreed?
Yeah. Opinion.
Yep. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Okay. And that's okay. You're human. You're going to have an opinion, right? The question is, can you set that opinion aside and focus on the evidence as it's presented in court and make a decision based on that, the information, the evidence, and not your opinion? Can you do that?
Yeah, I think I can do that. I mean, and as you can see, my recollection for that question was, that was so long ago, but that reflects my value because I wasn't there. I saw, and the part of the video that I saw was somewhat negative because of, what transpired on the video. So that's all I have. I don't know any other fact. So that's why I say what negative.
And I appreciate that. And I want to know, because you equivocated a little bit in terms of the question is, can you set aside that opinion? And you said, I think I can. But what we need to hear you say is, I can do that.
I can do that.
Okay.
And I believe I'll be partial. Great.
Partial or impartial?
I'll be impartial.
Yeah, okay. I had to double check. And you said that you had talked about, and I want to ask you about this, have you ever talked about George Floyd's death with your family, friends, or coworkers, or discussed it online? And you checked yes. And you said your wife.
Correct.
Right? And you said, we talked about how it could have been me or anyone else. Can you explain that a little?
I'm sorry, the last part of that sentence?
Sure. We talked about how it could have been me, comma, or anyone else.
I mean, anyone else. Me, human, can be it could be anybody. It could have been you. And so that's what I mean. And for me, I also used to live not far from that area before, when I first met my wife. So that's why I was like, it could have been me. So it could be anybody. So.
Do you have a perception or an opinion of the Minneapolis Police Department, just generally speaking?
I do not.
And do you have any experience with law enforcement officers?
I do not.
You do or do not?
I do not.
Okay, good. In terms of the sort of aftermath and the rioting and protesting, and there's a distinction, I understand, but you say that it asked for your opinion as to whether it was a negative or a positive impact, and you wrote that people in my community understand the protests but were not okay with the looting.
Correct.
How do you draw, what's the distinction, and can you just explain that a little bit more?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of my friends understand that, people have the right to protest, but at the same time, people are concerned that, businesses have to shut down. My wife didn't make it to work because she worked in the North Loop area, and and the image, my dad called me and was asking if I was okay, So I think that's what I was saying. I mean by that, right? People understand that, yeah, everybody has the right to protest, just like how people protest. I mean, people protest in this country I mean, I don't want to go on and on, but so I understand that the people have to voice their opinion for how they feel about specific topic, and that's their right. It's just the fact that a lot of businesses have to close and things like that. I think that's where I was coming from.
I appreciate that, and again, I completely understand your sentiment. All right.
Yeah.
You were asked a couple of questions about the Black Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter. Do you remember those questions generally?
I don't remember what my response was, but yeah, I mean.
Yeah, again, not trying to trick you. And you, with respect to the Black Lives Matter, you checked the box that you viewed them somewhat favorably, and you wrote, I think any lives matter, but black people's lives matter even more since they are marginalized.
Correct.
Okay. And you would agree with that now here today?
Yes.
Okay. And you also, in terms of Blue Lives Matter, found them to be somewhat favorable as well. And you wrote that you believe our cops need to be safe and feel safe to protect our community.
Yeah, but correct.
Okay. And again, you would still stand by that proposition?
I do.
The last two questions I have for you is the last questions that you were asked, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? And you checked the box yes. And why, when they asked you why, you said it is a service to my community and the country.
Correct.
How do you define that? What do you mean by that?
I mean, I think it's a civic duty. I talked about it earlier, and also believe that to make the justice system work, I think we need people that are part of the community to sit as a juror. So,
May I have a moment, Your Honor? Your Honor, we'll pass for cause.
All right, Mr. Slusho, what's going on? Juror 27, I have been pushing these people pretty hard since 8 o'clock in the morning, and so we need a lunch break, and I know that means more delay for you. I apologize. We actually have a lunch waiting for you, so hopefully it'll meet whatever dietary restrictions you might have. But we're going to return you to the other courtroom, and we'll bring you back. Let's go at 1:15. Any objection to that? That gives us about 50 minutes for lunch. All right. At 1:15, we'll come back and get you. Okay? Thank you. We're in recess. Counsel, thank you.